Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Bruce Howell, who is the Accessibility Services Manager for the Carroll Center. And if you haven't heard of them before, they are a non-profit organization for people who have lost their vision or that was born blind. And if you're new here into this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to talk about how can we make life better for the blind. And Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Emil.
So how would you describe the Carroll Center for someone that is not familiar with the work that you do?
The Carroll Center is really a life-changing place for people who have vision impairment. It offers them hope. It offers them the opportunity to learn skills that will be vitally important for them in order to be able to live an independent and productive life, whether it's to be a student and successful in school or college, whether it's to just be a part of the community in which they live and feel safe in the housing that they're living in, or for those who would like to either maintain their jobs or re-enter the workforce. These are the kind of skills and attitudinal changes and adjustments that they need to make in order to feel much better about themselves and have a higher sense of self-confidence.
So let's begin there, because you're blind as well. And
Correct.
I assume now that some of our listeners, and to some extent me included, look at being blind as just a really big handicap. And it's, I just see that it would be hard, but I don't know like the details so much because I haven't taken the time to put myself into that situation. So could you maybe tell me a little bit about your story, and also from your point of view, what it means to be blind?
Sure. First of all, each person who's blind or significantly visually impaired has a little different story. So the story that I share with you is my story, but it's not necessarily exactly the same as for others. I think there are parts that will resonate with anybody who's lost vision or who is blind. But we're all a little bit different, just like the general population. In my case, I actually have a retinal eye disease. The retina is in the back of your eye, and my retina has been gradually deteriorating all my life. The disease is called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. So when I was young, I actually had fairly decent vision. I couldn't see well at night, and I had a little bit of peripheral, that's your side vision issue. But all through school, through college, and even early into my working career, it really was not a big issue to me. But it continued to erode, and as my vision got worse, eventually I realized that I needed to learn to do things non-visually. I started by learning to use something called a screen magnifier, which allowed me to create larger font size, change the colors, improve the contrast when I was using my computer, for instance. I also had what's called the CCTV, closed circuit television digital magnifier, so I could put a book, or if I was writing a check, I could put it underneath that so I could enlarge it to see better. And that worked for a while, but ultimately my vision continued to get to the point where I just couldn't do things visually at all. It didn't matter what magnification I had, it wasn't going to work for me. So that's the point when I found out about the Carroll Center for the Blind in Newton, Massachusetts. That's the rehabilitation agency that you mentioned in your opening. I went there as a residential client about 12 years ago now, and was immersed in training to learn skills, to learn technology, to learn how to travel safely using a white mobility cane, and some counseling just to deal with the change in my life that was going to be necessary in order to be a non-visual person. What it taught me was that those things were challenging to learn. A lot of things, a lot of skills I had to put together, and I described it as kind of being a jigsaw puzzle. That I learned a lot of individual skills, but then had to figure out how they all related to each other to make it one unified program. But I went through that, and it really changed the way I felt about myself. I tell people it restored my sense of humor. Whether people think that was a good thing or not, I don't know. But it really made me feel so much better about myself, so much more confident that there is life after blindness.
Beautiful. And I really enjoy how you are leading with the message of hope, and that you help people emotionally as well. So from your point of view, what would you like for people that are visually oriented to know about your life and your challenges, and also I guess the things you've learned?
So first of all, I'm a person first, and my disability or my challenge is second. And I think that's so important for everyone to understand that, throughout life, we all face challenges. They're not always as dramatic as losing your vision, but we all have either permanent or temporary disabilities at points in our life. And that doesn't change the person underneath. It's important that we value people for who they are, what their abilities are, what their contributions to community or to work environments can be. So I oftentimes, now that I work at the Carroll Center, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that, I don't broadcast initially when I'm working with new clients that I am blind, because I don't think that's important to them. If it comes up in the conversation, or if it actually adds value to the kind of work that I'm doing, it may come up at some point. But it's so important that for me personally, and for others who have lost vision or who are blind, to have a sense of who they are regardless of their blindness. And I think that's kind of key. And I think that's what the Carroll Center has really helped me to achieve, and others that they've worked with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for me. So tell me a bit more about how the center works, because I read on your website that you're working with everything from children to seniors. And so I guess people are coming to you that are in a range of visual impairment, right? How does the center work?
Yeah, it's absolutely true, Emil. Our mission statement is that we serve people of all ages and all stages of blindness. So that's not only the range of age that you mentioned, but the range of vision loss too. We have, not only do we do services on our campus in Newton, Massachusetts, which is where we do a lot of the training for people like me who come there to really reclaim their lives and learn the skills that they need to learn. But in addition to that, we provide services out in the community. These can be to help parents of newborn children who are blind to understand how they communicate with their children and how they help their development flourish without vision. We have teachers of the vision impaired who work with students who are mainstreamed in public schools, but they have vision impairment or they're blind, so they need some additional supports in order to be able to keep up with their peers in that kind of setting. We also work with individuals out in the community who are seniors, who are maybe living alone and need to make adjustments in their house to make them safe, and don't have a throw rug at the top of a staircase, things like that could be really small, but be really important factors for changing the way that they can live safely in their homes. But at the Carroll Center, as I mentioned, my story, we have a residential program, where it's called Independent Living Program, where it is what it says it is. It really helps people to be able to live independently, to not have to rely on others for doing everything for them. They can learn to live safely in their home. They learn to cook. They learn to label things, to keep track of their clothing, to all the kind of things that you would imagine are necessary to live independently. How to shop, how do you shop, where do you get the assistance that you need, how do you do things online through your computer, because of course technology has become an increasingly important benefit to people who are visually impaired or blind. It's a great equalizer when they know how to use that. And then we also have day students who come there to receive training. Typically it will be in some of those technology areas, where they will learn to use a computer or a smartphone or a refreshable braille device or a book reader, things like that, that help keep people connected to the world that they live in. And then lastly, in the summertime, we have a very different program. We focus all of our attention on on children, kids, anywhere from grade school all the way up to those they're sort of transition age and heading to college. Part of that is to actually give them skills, as I described for myself, particularly the ones that are going off to college, so they have a chance to be better prepared for that. But an equally important part is that oftentimes children are pretty isolated in their vision impairment. They're, especially if they're mainstreamed in a school, they may be the only child in that entire school who is blind or visually impaired. So having these programs in the summer gives them an opportunity to be around some of their peers, and that social networking is such an important factor for their acceptance of their blindness and their encouragement to one another.
Yeah, I can imagine how important the community building aspect of what you guys are doing is, and also so many things that you have to think about in just the changes in how you live your life that I haven't considered. It's very interesting to listen. So we talked a bit about technology, and just with the tools you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, I assume that being non-visually oriented has changed a lot just in maybe the last 10, 20 years with new technology. And yeah, could you tell me a bit more about how life has changed with technology, and also what has been the impact of COVID-19? It might be a bit of a different question, but I guess you guys are in bigger need of using technology thanks to the pandemic as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Let's talk about technology first, and then I'll get into the more
Yes.
recent impact of COVID and why that has become so critically important. Technology absolutely is a game changer for people who are blind or visually impaired. Being able to, the whole world, everything's online now. You're either on your computer, your tablet, your smartphone, connected constantly for everything. Anything that you conceivably want to do, whether it's to talk to the appliances in your house through, a smart application, or to order food online, just to communicate with the various means of social media, texting, emailing, any of that requires the ability for everyone to be able to use devices appropriately. For people who are blind or visually impaired, this presents a great challenge because they need some type of assistive technology which interacts with the device that they're using and enables them to get access to that same kind of information and do the things that they need to do. For people who have some vision loss but still have usable vision, they're going to use something called screen magnification. That, as the name implies, allows them to enlarge the print that's on the screen of the device they're using. But screen magnification can actually be much more than that. It can allow them to change the colors. It can have a reverse image so that they're seeing white letters on a black background. It can enhance the contrast, all sorts of different adjustments like that. So depending what a person's particular vision impairment is, it enables them to use that vision to the best of their ability. When you get beyond that, as I mentioned in my own story, and you can no longer use your vision to do those sort of things, you have to move into what's called a screen reader. That type of assistive technology is literally talking to me. It tells me when I'm on my computer what I'm doing, what I'm typing, where I am on a web page, etc. It's a skill. It's a sophisticated type of software that you have to learn to use. There are a lot of shortcut keys that you learn to be able to use it efficiently and effectively, to be able to do things. The challenge with all these techniques, all these assistive technologies, is that the way that a website or an application is designed and then coded and built out has a dramatic impact on the ability for these assistive technologies to be able to interact with it correctly. We learned a while ago at the Carroll Center that as great a job as we do with teaching our blind and visually impaired consumers how to use these various devices and technologies, is only going to be as effective as the content that they're trying to interact with. So that's why we began about 12 years ago the accessibility services business that I now manage. And the goal there is to work with the producers of these online products and content to help them design and build them in a more effective way for the screen readers to be able to interact with them. as we've gotten into COVID times, there's been a huge requirement, if you will, due to social distancing and not being able to be in person with one another, to be able to communicate and do things online in an accelerated way that I don't think anybody could have anticipated. Anywhere from the video conferencing software that you and I are using today to be able to communicate, if that wasn't built in an accessible way, it would be really difficult for me to have this conversation with you today. As a person who's blind, it's challenging for me to be grocery shopping these days. So I really need to be able to use an online grocery shopping service. As they make changes to those applications, it can work great one day. The next day, I might not be able to use one of those features effectively because they've done something, changed something when they've upgraded it, that knocks out that accessibility access that I formerly had. So this is the nature of my business. COVID has certainly exacerbated people's need to keep their online products updated and functioning really well because volumes of users have increased. But the danger there is, as they move to make changes more quickly, is that they don't always do the things that avoid breaking accessibility.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That the rapid development of technologies has a wonderful potential, but when it's going fast, they might not prioritizing people who are blind because it's such a small minority. So
yeah, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. And it's two things are important there. Unfortunately, all too often, accessibility chases technology, and it should be the other way around. As people are designing, building things, they should just consider accessibility as a something that they build into it that's just as important as any other feature that they're doing. There's so many people around the world who have some type of disability. And the second point I want to make there is accessibility is not just for people who are blind. People with all types of disabilities can be impacted by the way a website is designed or developed. People with cognitive or reading challenges may struggle with long paragraphs of text. It would be so much better to design that information by using shorter bullet points that they could absorb more easily. People who have mobility challenges, they don't have the use of their hands or their fingers, have to use adaptive keyboards, for instance, so they can't use a mouse. They might not be able to click on something with a mouse. So there has to be some other way that they can access and activate those elements of a website besides doing a mouse click. So all these things become factors. It's although many web accessibility issues, yes, they are impacting people who are visually impaired or blind, there can be just a wide array of other issues that persons with other types of disabilities also confront.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And writing in stuff like shorter paragraphs I think that's helpful for everyone to make information more digestible. So looking forward then, what kind of changes are you hopeful would happen in the next 10 years, both maybe technology-wise and society-wise?
Wow, tough question to answer. Two sort of different answers to that. Society. Let's do society first. It's being sure that we're inclusive in our thought process and in everything that we do. We've seen in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted back in 1990, and it's gone a long way to helping to ensure physical access to places and buildings. We're talking ramps and handrails that are designed correctly. We might have audible traffic signals that enable people to cross streets more easily. It didn't come easily, but it is pretty well baked into the way that we think about physical world that we're in. We're not that far along in the web accessibility or digital accessibility world yet, unfortunately. I think we're making progress. Part of that's been driven by a lot of lawsuits around the United States about web accessibility. So it's kind of forced people to give it more attention. That's not ideally the way that I like to see it happen. I would wish that it would be more intuitive and altruistic for companies and colleges and government agencies to make their websites more accessible. I think that's improving, and I think that needs to continue to improve for our society to be truly inclusive and embrace everyone's value. In terms of technology changes, it's hard for me to honestly to figure out exactly where we're going. But what I can say is that currently, a couple of the trends that I'm seeing, and there's no reason to think they won't continue. One is the ability to control things by voice. I mean, we see all the smart devices that are out there now, and I think we're just at the beginning of all this. I think much of what we'll be able to do in the future to interact with everything around us is going to be through voice commands, as opposed to needing specifically to type on something or to click on a mouse. I think we're going to have much more of that built into things that we're doing. And secondly, I think artificial intelligence, AI, is playing a bigger and bigger role here. The more that you can get devices and computers like a smartphone to recognize objects, for instance, and give that feedback to someone who's blind or visually impaired, is going to be a real help. It'll never replace vision entirely, but it's going to level the playing field quite a bit. If I can hold the camera of my phone up to a room and it can identify things for me and tell me how far away they are, it's going to just enable me to move with much more confidence and freedom than I currently have. And we're already seeing a lot of mobile applications that are building those kind of techniques into them, particularly for indoor navigation, where you can't rely on GPS signals, for instance. That kind of artificial intelligence being built into a mobile application is going to be really beneficial.
Oh, that's really cool. I have more questions, but we're coming up towards the end of this interview. So I want to end with someone listening to this and wants to take some positive action for making life better for those who are non-visually oriented. What can they do, and how can they stay up to date with the Carroll Center?
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So although we generate revenues through services that we provide to consumers and through the web accessibility clients that I work with, there's always a need for additional funding, donations, and bequests. So the Carroll Center for the Blind, which is in Newton, our web address is www.caroll, and that's spelled CARROLL.org. That's our web address. There's an opportunity to donate there, and certainly there's an opportunity to learn about all the different aspects of the Carroll Center. That landing page, the home page that you land on, is divided into the different kind of areas that we concentrate in, and you can follow any one of those tabs to get more details about that particular line of our business and our service offerings.
Beautiful. Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great.com today. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and appreciate that you reached out to us.
Thank you. And for you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that way you are voting to the algorithms saying that this conversation is important, so we can spread awareness to more people about the importance of making the world more accessible for people with vision impairments. Thank you so much for listening, and we see you in the next episode. What is Great.com? That is the most common question that we get. And the shortest answer I can give you is that we are a company that is moving money from the online casino industry and donates it to charities that is helping the environment. The long answer, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you today. But if you're curious, definitely Google what is Great.com to learn more.